If you're listening to this right now, don't scroll away. What I'm about to tell you isn't a campfire story or some clickbait headline. It's my personal account, the one I swore I would never speak about again. My name is Daniel Cross. I'm a freelance investigative journalist, and my life changed forever the night I crossed into the Nevada desert, chasing whispers about what really happens near Area 51. I thought I was chasing a story. I didn't know the story would start chasing me. It began with a tip from a former contractor who claimed he'd seen non-human craft being tested at night, far away from the official perimeter. Most journalists would have ignored it, but I wasn't most journalists. My career was already circling the drain. One expose too many angry calls from people in suits who didn't like my questions. This was my chance to either prove everyone wrong or end up another name on the list of conspiracy nuts screaming on the internet. I packed my camera, a voice recorder, and drove out in my beat-up Jeep. The desert road stretched like a scar under the pale light of the moon, each mile dragging me closer to the place no one was supposed to enter. When I finally killed the headlights and pulled off onto a dirt track, the silence was suffocating. There was no wind, no sound of insects, just a strange hum in the distance. At first, I thought it was my ears ringing from the long drive, but the more I listened, the clearer it became. It wasn't a sound so much as a vibration, crawling under my skin, thrumming in my chest like a second heartbeat. I set up my camera on a tripod, pointed toward the faint glow flickering beyond a ridge. I crouched low, recording notes into my mic, my hands shaking more from adrenaline than fear. That's when the air changed. Imagine standing near a live power line, the way the hairs on your arms rise, the way your skin prickles. Multiply that by 10, and you'll understand what I felt when the glow intensified. At first, I thought it was a flare or some kind of military test, but then it lifted smooth, silent, defying every law of flight I knew. A massive triangular silhouette edged with pulsing lights hovered above the ridge. I froze. My instincts screamed to get back in the Jeep, but my legs refused to obey. I don't remember taking the first step forward, but suddenly I was walking toward it, my camera forgotten behind me. The craft shifted, rotating almost lazily, as if it had noticed me. And then came the light. Not a beam like in the movies, this was different. It wasn't shining on me, it was inside me, pulling at every nerve, every thought. I gasped, stumbling backward, clutching my head as static filled my ears. In that instant, I knew one thing with bone-deep certainty. This wasn't a test flight, and I wasn't supposed to be here. The Jeep was only 30 yards behind me, but it might as well have been miles. My body wouldn't respond the way I wanted. My legs moved sluggishly, as if the ground had turned to tar. I forced myself into a run, each step a battle against whatever invisible force pressed against me. My hand closed around the Jeep's door handle when the hum roared in my skull. The engine died before I even turned the key. Every electronic device, phone, recorder, camera, flickered and went black. That's when I realized I was trapped. I don't know how long I sat there, gripping the wheel, praying the lights would fade. But instead of retreating, the craft descended lower. Its surface shimmered like liquid metal, rippling with faint patterns that made no sense, symbols I couldn't focus on. And then, I swear on my life, I saw movement inside. Figures. Tall, narrow, silhouettes framed against the glowing interior. My throat tightened. My lungs forgot how to work. The next memory I have isn't of the desert at all. It's of a blinding white chamber, my body weightless, my arms pinned though nothing touched them. Couldn't scream. Couldn't even breathe the way I wanted. Shapes loomed above me, their faces hidden in the glare. Cold hands, or maybe just energy, slid across my skin, probing, searching. My thoughts weren't private anymore. They were pulling them out, one by one, like pages torn from a book. My childhood, my failures, my secrets, they saw everything. And just when I thought I would break, one of them leaned closer. For the first time, I saw its eyes, Enormous, black, reflective like pools of oil. Staring into them wasn't like looking at a living creature. It was like staring into a mirror that showed everything you never wanted to admit about yourself. I felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with my body and everything to do with my soul. I don't know how they let me go. I only know that I woke up hours later, lying in the dirt beside my Jeep, the desert silent again. My equipment was fried, my watch cracked, and my camera's memory card was melted like plastic left in a fire. But etched in the sand near me was a pattern. Circles intersecting lines, glowing faintly before fading into nothing. My first instinct was to document it, but before I could, headlights appeared on the horizon. Military jeeps, men with rifles. They didn't ask if I was okay. They didn't ask what I saw. They ordered me to my knees, confiscated my gear, and drove me out of there with a warning I'll never forget. You didn't see anything. You weren't here. If you value your life, you'll keep your mouth shut. But I can't, because the truth is still out there, and whatever they're hiding in that desert, whatever hunted me that night, it's not finished with me yet. I kept my promise to the channel. If you're new here, hit subscribe, because stories like this don't travel far on their own. My name is Daniel Cross, investigative journalist, and the night I crossed into the Nevada scrub changed everything. When they shoved me into the back of that unmarked truck, the world was still humming from whatever had been taken from me. I tried to tell the men who questioned me what I'd seen, but their faces were flat, their eyes tired in a way that suggested this wasn't the first time they'd erased someone's memory or buried someone's camera. They wiped my recorder with a rag that smelled like solvent and placed an ID card in my hand. No name, a number, and a warning. You were lucky. Keep it that way. I wanted to punch them. I wanted to scream. Instead, I drove away in a borrowed sedan and watched the desert swallow the place where the light had been. For a while, I thought running would help. I drove across state lines, slept in motels under fake names, and tried to piece together anything salvageable from the wreckage in my head. There were flashes. A shape like a toothless jaw, a grid of tiny instruments that hummed without moving, and a particular metallic tang in my mouth that never quite left. My body bore marks too. Small, pale scars under my shoulder blade and a crescent of numbness in my left hand that made my fingers clumsy. When I went to a clinic, the doctor's expression shifted from concern to suspicion as soon as I mentioned the desert and a craft. He asked me to leave. The text started a week later. I have a private number that I gave only to 2 sources. Both went silent after the Area 51 trip. One of them texted me once, "Stop, they're watching." The other sent an audio, broken, a wet breath, and then nothing. I began to notice a black SUV whenever I left my apartment. It was subtle at first, a shadow on the next block, a pair of taillights at the same traffic light. Then it became more brazen. Headlights outside my window at 2 a.m., the sound of a door closing and footsteps on the fire escape, though no one could get in that way. My email accounts received strange attachments, empty files with timestamps that matched the moments I remembered being examined on board the ship. My camera's SD card died, but the wreckage behaved like a breadcrumb trail, a puzzle someone wanted me to glaze over and forget. I tried to publish. I wrote a piece for a small online outlet, a careful, factual account that avoided words like alien and abduction. An editor friend called me after it went up. He said the site deleted the post within an hour and then vanished. Domain parked, staff uncontactable. My inbox flooded with polite requests to reconsider my career choices, from addresses I'd never seen before. Paranoia is not an abstraction when your life rearranges itself around the idea of watching. I stopped trusting mirrors. I started checking the corners of rooms like someone who'd been prey all his life. Sleep came in short, jagged bursts and always with the same recurring image. That chamber again, white and clinical, a shadow leaning close, its mouth, if it had one, opening like a slit, and then a ladder of light piercing through my chest. When I woke, my sheets were damp and my heart pounded against ribs that felt too thin. I tried rational explanations. Perhaps it was a military experiment, a secret drone test, a new sensory weapon. Maybe I'd wandered into a classified test zone and suffered an electromagnetic attack that scrambled electronics and left me with psychosomatic symptoms. Those theories have to be entertained because they keep you from surrendering to the impossible. But then other things happened that resisted tidy rationalization. A friend who runs a locksmith shop examined the scars on my shoulder and frowned. He told me the pattern looked deliberate, like puncture marks from an instrument rather than an animal or tree branch. He refused payment and said, "There are people you don't want looking at you after something like this." When I dug into the tip that had brought me to the desert, a contractor who'd claimed to have seen non-human craft, the trail went cold. Phone numbers disconnected, the Facebook page scrubbed, traces of the man's employment erased from the contractor listings. It was as if he had never existed. I started keeping a notebook, analog, heavy, impossible to remotely delete, and wrote everything down in messy script. I hid it in a hollowed-out book and carried it like a talisman. A week later, it was gone. The hollow space was empty the morning I reached for it, and the book sat innocent on my shelf. That's when I stopped trying to outsmart whoever, whatever, was watching and began to prepare to be found. I made backup tapes, printed copies of my notes, duplicated them in hidden places. I recorded videos with a disposable camera to create analog evidence that a digital wipe could not touch. I reached out to other journalists, a couple of investigative reporters with reputations for pushing into the gray zones of power. Some laughed and called me a drama seeker. A few candidly told me that their own inboxes had been visited and to drop it. One, a woman named Maria who covered military contractors, met me in a diner on the outskirts of Las Vegas and slid a single sheet of paper across the table. On it were coordinates and a time. A helicopter pad west of Groom Lake at 2 o'clock. She said cautiously, "I've seen a pattern like this. They recruit people who are voices that could matter and make them disappear or discredit them. We go together or not at all." The night we drove out, the sky was clear and full of hard, indifferent stars. The road smelled of hot sand and rust. We parked where the asphalt dissolved into gravel and walked for what felt like an hour. There were no fences, no signs, just stretches of desert and the occasional low-maintenance building lit dimly by sodium lights. At 2 a.m. sound rose behind us, soft at first then terrible, a wave of pressure that made my ears bleed. A craft, low and slow, passed overhead with that same internal hum. Maria grabbed my arm and we ran. The light swept across us and for a heartbeat I felt the old paralysis. But this time there was a difference. Recognition. The craft seemed to hesitate when it found us, like a hunter pausing to consider a wounded animal. Then, instead of descending, it fired a thin beam into the distance, and a figure, an animal or a person, I still can't tell, fell forward like a puppet with its strings cut. Before we could reach it, men in black suits and badges dropped from ATVs and surrounded us. They were efficient, practiced. They had a way of speaking that spoon steel under velvet. "You saw nothing," one said. "You will leave." Maria did not leave. She photographed the badge of the man speaking and whispered, "This is how you get fired upon by the institution." They took the camera, erased the frame, and then the frame's memory. Maria's expression after that night was hollow. She told me later she had been offered work she couldn't refuse, and after a month she stopped returning calls. I am not a religious man, but I found myself praying in ways I never had, bargaining, trading years of my life for one more solid night of sleep. The thought that keeps me awake, the one that feels like an ember under the skin, is this: whatever I glimpsed that night was not a single event but a process. It wasn't about abduction as much as recovery, collecting, cataloging, experimenting. And if that's true, then I am both evidence and perhaps, in some perverse way, a participant. Because the more I try to distance myself from that desert, the closer it follows. Last week, walking home from a gig, I found a footprint in fresh cement outside a construction site. It was not human. The proportions were wrong, a shallow crescent where a ball of the foot should be, and inside it was a tiny set of parallel ridges, like fingerprints, but not. I photographed it with my phone, my hands shaking so badly the picture was blurred, and when I tried to pull the image up the file was corrupted. The print was there before my eyes, and then, like everything else, it was gone. I could tell you now that I am preparing to confront it, to meet the thing that has been shadowing my life and try to force a narrative out of those pieces. But that would be a lie. I am compiling, waiting, and trying, most of all trying, to keep a record that survives whatever erasures are coming. I can feel the shape of the next move the way you feel thunder in the distance. They are patient. So am I, or at least I am learning to be. The next time something moves in the sky, I'll be there. I'll be ready. Or I'll be lucky. Either way, when you tell me to continue, I'll tell you what happens next. I kept the channel promise and I kept my eyes open. If you've stuck with me this far, hit subscribe because the next part is where the story gets ugly. My name is Daniel Cross, investigative journalist, and after Maria disappeared I realized I had two options. Disappear quietly like everyone else who'd poked the scar behind Groom Lake, or force the wound open and let whatever was inside bleed into the light. I chose to pry. I spent weeks building a net of analog evidence. Cassette tapes hidden inside library books, printed manifests shoved under loose floorboards at a friend's cabin, a battered Polaroid camera with the film wrapped in tin foil and buried in the pocket of a jacket I left intentionally at a diner where a known contractor ate. I learned to move like someone who has been hunted, slow, indirect, paranoid in ways that felt like survival instincts mutating into craft. I began communicating in the old code reporters use when they don't want their emails read. Meet me at this time, check the third line for the second word, bring nothing electronic. That's how I found Owen. He was not a journalist. He was a former avionics tech with a limp and a vocabulary that tasted of engine oil and cigarettes. He'd worked on classified projects for decades and had the kind of cynicism only people who've touched government secrets can cultivate. He didn't believe in aliens, he told me bluntly, but he believed in anomalies, machines that didn't belong to any contractor he recognized. He said he'd been seeing strange maintenance logs and airflow calculations that made no sense, software signatures that matched nothing he knew. Something's building a language inside our machines, he said, and his knuckles went white on his coffee cup. With Owen's help, I started triangulating patterns. Unusual transport schedules, sudden blackouts at small outposts, procurement orders for materials that didn't match anything on public rosters. The more we dug, the more the pattern looked less like a single program and more like an industry, an ecosystem of secrecy where private contractors, shadowy divisions, and something else all shared a common ledger. One night, following a lead about an unmarked hangar, we trespassed in the kind of way that only two desperate people can. Quietly, with flashlights strapped to our chests and hasty binoculars pressed to our foreheads. The hangar wasn't on any map, and the guards we skirted around didn't wear government insignia. Inside, beneath tarps and scaffolding, we found what I can only describe as a library of artifacts. Panels with unknown alloys, arrays of lenses the size of dinner plates, crates labeled in 3 different languages and stamped with symbols that looked eerily similar to the pattern left in the sand after my first encounter. Owen touched one of the panels and went pale. "This isn't ours," he whispered. "This tech isn't derivative. It's original." We photographed everything with the Polaroid because the images would exist even if someone later scrubbed servers, and we left with hands that trembled from both adrenaline and the hum that seemed to live in the very air of that hangar. That hum followed us home. For days after, I would hear it under the roar of traffic, like a bass note that refused to leave the world. It wasn't just a sound. It was a presence. It was also then that the dreams got worse, less fragmented and more precise. I started dreaming in diagrams. A lattice of nodes, each node pulsing with data, and lines that stretched from node to node like veins. Sometimes the dreams were in first person and I could feel a small probing instrument glide beneath my skin, mapping, recording. Other times I stood over a table and watched men and machines watch me as if I were a specimen. The dreams taught me a terrible thing. They were a bridge. Whatever had taken me had not just scanned me. It had left a thread inside my head, a thin filament that could be tugged from a distance. I tested it. One afternoon at the metal shop where Owen worked, a junior tech bumped the table and fired a static discharge that flared through the room. I felt it then, a whisper at the edge of thought, like someone dialing a memory into place. Images coalesced in my mind without my permission. The face of my mother when she kissed me goodbye at the hospital, the name of a teacher I hadn't thought about in 20 years, the smell of diesel from an old bus I rode once. It was frightening because I could feel the connections being reactivated by something outside me. We realized then that this was not only about abduction, it was also about access. Whoever they were had built a mechanism to map human memory and then, worse, to reopen it from afar. We decided to go public in a controlled way. A local radio show, a recorded interview with an independent podcaster who'd promised to keep tapes and duplicate them offline. I thought if the story lived in multiple hands, it would be safer. If my notes were spread out like seeds, some would take root. The interview was recorded in an old church basement. No cell signal, analog decks, the hum of an ancient heater in the background. Halfway through, as I described the hangar, the microphone hissed and the lights in the room dimmed for a breath, long enough that a single candle guttered. The podcaster's face went slack, and for a moment he wasn't listening to me, he was listening to something else. When the interview ended and we walked outside, the street lamps were already off, though the power company reported no outages. That night, someone tried to break into Owen's house. He caught a shadow at the window and fired a shotgun. Whatever was outside left no prints in the dirt. The next morning, his work van was gone. I found skid marks on the gravel where it had been towed in the night, as if lifted and transported, metal sheared in a way that suggested industrial equipment and not human hands. Owen left me a note. Get out. Don't publish. I felt the floor drop again. For a brief, anger-fueled moment, I wanted to publish everything anyway, to pour gasoline on the secret and watch it burn. Then I thought of Maria and the way her eyes hollowed when the men in suits had spoken to her. I thought of the contractor who'd vanished and the way my hollowed book had been stripped clean. I deleted the file from my hard drive and printed a copy, which I cut into pieces and scattered across 3 return addresses and a P.O. box. It was the most cowardly brave thing I'd ever done. The next move was not mine. Came 2 weeks later, in the form of a video that appeared on an obscure forum under a username I didn't recognize. The footage showed a small object being lowered into a reverent, sterile room. A voice, distorted and low, narrated in a language I didn't know and then switched to heavily accented English. Specimen 87. Cognitive transfer incomplete. Recommend further interface. The camera panned and my stomach dropped. There, behind a glass partition, was a bank of monitors showing a familiar chamber. In one monitor, in a frame I couldn't shake, a figure that might have been me lay strapped, and a hand, long and pale, moved across a panel like a pianist playing a score only it could read. The video vanished from the forum within hours, but someone had mirrored it to a dozen other sites. I downloaded it and watched the same 10 seconds over and over until the pixels blurred into static. That night, the filament inside my head tightened. I could feel a pressure like a finger pressing from the inside of my skull outward, and with it came the sensation of being observed not by a face but by a pattern. The final thing I'll tell you for now is this. I am not sure who is worse, the ones who took me, or the ones who cover their tracks so thoroughly that the only proof left is the gnawing certainty in a man's bones. I have mapped a path deeper into whatever lies behind the hangars and the coded manifests, and the next stop looks like a facility that does not appear on any satellite grid. I have a plan that involves cameras buried beneath concrete, a network of analog recorders, and one last person who owes me a favor and hates authority. When you tell me to continue, I will walk back toward that place. I will risk everything to know what they are doing with us. But know this before you ask me to keep going. The next part will not be safe and I might not return. If I don't, at least the record will remain. I promised the channel I'd tell everything, and now it's time for the final part. My name is Daniel Cross, investigative journalist, and what I am about to recount is the culmination of months of fear, tracking, and survival. The plan was simple in theory. Infiltrate the facility that doesn't exist, record evidence, and get out. In practice, nothing is ever simple when you're being hunted by something that moves faster than humans, sees deeper than humans, and thinks in ways humans cannot comprehend. I drove out to the coordinates Owen had left me, late at night when the desert was cold and the stars mercilessly sharp. My Jeep was reinforced with steel panels I'd scavenged from a junkyard, old analog cameras strapped to the roof, and a bag full of notebooks that contained every detail of the journey so far. As I approached the site, the air shimmered. Not heat, not a mirage, but the same pressure and vibration I'd felt the night I was taken. My pulse throbbed in rhythm with it, and for a moment I thought I might be paralyzed again. I forced myself out of the vehicle, leaving it running with the keys in the ignition to give the illusion someone had arrived and left in a hurry. The perimeter was empty. No fences, no guards, just a wide expanse of desert that fell into darkness. I crept forward, keeping the cameras pointed in every direction. Then I saw it. A hangar, low and metallic, with no markings, its doors partially open as if inviting me in. The humming began before I entered. Inside, the air was different. Clean, metallic, alive. The lights flickered once as I stepped onto the concrete floor, and there it was. The chamber I had glimpsed in dreams, the white, clinical space where I had first felt weightless, pinned, and scanned. Only this time it wasn't empty. Figures moved inside, tall, thin, impossibly smooth, their heads elongated and eyes dark as oil. They didn't speak. They communicated through a pulse in the air that resonated inside my chest. And then I realized they knew I was watching. One step toward me, and I felt the filament in my skull tighten, pulling memories, pulling fear, but also a strange clarity. They weren't just collecting humans, they were cataloging experience, emotion, thought, and now they were evaluating me. I raised my cameras and began to film, hands trembling, knowing every frame could be my last. They did not resist, did not flee. Instead, the tallest figure lifted a hand or a limb, I could not be sure, and the lights above dimmed in a synchronized rhythm. I felt my mind expand, memories I hadn't consciously accessed surfacing in streams of pure vision. My childhood, my failures, my ambitions, every personal secret laid bare. And then a choice presented itself, or at least I perceived it as such. Submit fully and allow them to map me completely, disappear into their network, or resist and risk obliteration. I resisted. My fingers tightened around the camera, my heart hammering against ribs that felt too thin. The humming rose to a pitch I could feel in my bones. In that moment, I understood. They were testing me, measuring my response, my will to survive. And then it happened. The lights surged, the chamber blurred, and I was flung backward, weightless, through a tunnel of color and vibration, landing hard outside the hangar in the desert sand. The Jeep was exactly where I had left it, dust settling over the tires as if no time had passed. My cameras were intact, the tapes undisturbed, the notebooks dry. I didn't wait to think. I drove. I drove across the desert, past empty roads and distant mountains, never stopping until the city lights washed over me and the hum finally faded. I returned home, but nothing felt normal. I am not the same man who entered the desert months ago. Every glance over my shoulder, every shadow moving in my peripheral vision, reminds me of the filament inside me, the thread connecting me to whatever exists beyond comprehension. I have shared only fragments with the public because to reveal too much invites consequences I cannot survive. But the footage is real, the experiences are real, and I am real. Still breathing, still remembering. I write this now because the line between observer and observed is thinner than anyone dares admit, and because the truth is out there, even if most will never see it. Whoever, whatever, is operating behind those walls continues to watch, to map, to measure. I do not know why I was spared, why I was returned, or what their ultimate goal is. But I know this. I carry proof in the form of memories, scars, and recordings And one day, if someone else is brave enough to trace the path I have walked, they might understand what lurks in the desert and why the lights never truly fade. I will continue to document, continue to observe, and continue to survive. The story ends here for now, but the presence remains, and I will never forget the night I realized that some hunts never end, and sometimes you are the hunted long after the hunter has left the shadows.